The desert stretched endlessly beneath the wide western sky. Dry winds carried dust across the lonely trails of the American frontier, where survival depended on strength, patience, and silence. In those lands rode a man most settlers whispered about but rarely understood, an Apache warrior named Dakota. Dakota had once lived among his people in a strong and proud Apache camp hidden deep in the mountains. As a young man, he learned the ways of the land from his father, how to track animals across dry sand, how to find water where none seemed to exist, and how to read the signs of danger written in the wind. The Apache believed the land spoke to those who listened carefully, but the world around Dakota had changed. Years earlier, violence between settlers, soldiers, and tribes had destroyed many villages. In one terrible raid, Dakota lost his family and most of his clan. After that day, he chose to live alone. Some people in nearby frontier towns called him a ghost rider of the desert. Others simply feared him because he was Apache. Dakota rarely entered towns except when he needed salt, bullets, or a little grain for the winter months. When he did, he kept his head down and spoke only a few quiet words. Despite their fear, many settlers secretly respected him. They knew he was the best tracker in the territory. Lost travelers had been guided back to safety by his sharp eyes more than once. Still, Dakota preferred the company of the open land. One cold evening, as the sun began to sink behind distant red cliffs, Dakota rode his horse along a narrow canyon trail. His sharp eyes noticed something strange in the distance, a thin column of dark smoke rising into the sky. Smoke in the desert rarely meant anything good. Dakota guided his horse forward carefully, his instincts warning him to move slowly. As he rode closer, the smell of burned wood and gunpowder drifted through the air. Soon the canyon opened to reveal a terrible sight. A wagon train had been attacked. Broken wagons lay scattered across the ground. Crates of supplies were torn open, and blankets flapped in the wind like abandoned flags. The sand was scarred with hoof prints and signs of struggle. Several bodies lay still among the wreckage. Dakota dismounted quietly. He had seen such scenes before. Sometimes bandits attacked travelers for money or goods. Sometimes the desert itself, hunger, thirst, and panic finished what men had started. Dakota moved through the wreckage slowly, his sharp eyes studying every detail. He knelt beside the tracks in the sand. Many horses. Armed men. The attackers had come fast and left quickly. Then something unusual caught his attention. Near one of the overturned wagons, the canvas covering shifted slightly in the wind. At first, Dakota thought it was only the breeze. But then he heard it, a faint sound, a weak cry. Dakota froze and listened carefully. The sound came again, soft but real. Someone was still alive. Moving quickly. He lifted the torn canvas and looked beneath the wagon. Hidden there was a young woman, her clothes dusty and torn. Her face was pale with exhaustion, and one arm was stained with dried blood. Her dark hair framed frightened eyes that stared up at him. She clearly wasn't from the frontier. Her features and clothing showed she came from faraway China, perhaps where many workers had recently arrived to help build railroads across the western lands. For a moment, the two strangers simply looked at each other. The young woman seemed terrified. Perhaps she had heard stories about Apache warriors, stories told by people who did not understand them. Dakota raised his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. The woman tried to speak, but only a weak whisper came out. She was badly injured and dangerously close to death from thirst. Dakota looked around again at the destroyed wagons and silent bodies. Whoever attacked this caravan might still be nearby. Staying here would mean certain death for the injured stranger. Without hesitation, the lonely Apache made a decision. He gently lifted the woman into his arms and carried her to his horse. Using a blanket from the wreckage, he secured her carefully so she would not fall. the desert wind grew colder as night approached. Dakota mounted his horse and turned toward the distant mountains where his hidden shelter waited. He did not know the woman's name. He did not know why she had been traveling through such dangerous land, and he certainly did not know the truth, that the wounded stranger he had just rescued was no ordinary traveler, but a woman with a secret powerful enough to bring danger across the entire frontier. For now, she was simply a life worth saving. And the lonely warrior rode into the darkening desert, with fate quietly following behind them. The desert night grew colder as the Apache warrior rode toward the mountains. The moon slowly rose above the dark hills, casting pale silver light across the empty land. Dakota guided his horse carefully along narrow trails only he knew, making sure the injured woman behind him stayed steady. She was weak and barely conscious, but once in a while she stirred, whispering words he could not understand. After several hours of travel, the rocky desert began to change. Tall cliffs rose on both sides, hiding a small valley deep within the mountains. Few people knew this place existed. A narrow path wound between boulders and cactus until it opened into a hidden shelter surrounded by stone walls and small trees. This was Dakota's home. It was not much, just a small wooden structure beside a cave and a fire pit, but it was safe and hidden from the outside world. A small stream flowed nearby, one of the rare sources of fresh water in the harsh desert. Dakota carefully lifted the woman from the horse and carried her inside. He laid her gently on a bed made from blankets and animal skins. The dim firelight revealed how badly injured she was. Her arm had been cut deeply, likely by a knife or broken wood during the attack. Dakota quickly prepared what he needed. From a small wooden box, he took dried herbs his people had used for generations to treat wounds. He cleaned the cut with warm water and crushed the herbs into a paste. The woman winced in pain, but she did not wake fully. "Easy," Dakota said quietly, though he knew she probably didn't understand his words. He wrapped her arm carefully with clean cloth and placed a cup of water beside the bed. For the next 2 days, the stranger remained weak and silent. Dakota watched over her while continuing his daily tasks. He hunted small game, gathered firewood, and checked the surrounding hills for signs of danger. Whoever attacked that wagon train might still be searching the desert. On the third morning, the woman finally opened her eyes. Sunlight streamed through the small window, and she immediately looked around with confusion and fear. When she saw Dakota sitting near the fire sharpening a knife, she gasped and tried to sit up. Her injured arm stopped her. Dakota quickly raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "Water," he said gently, offering the cup. The woman hesitated before accepting it. Her hands trembled as she drank slowly. Up close, Dakota could see she was younger than he first thought, perhaps no older than 20. Her eyes were dark and intelligent, though still filled with fear. After a moment, she spoke softly. "May." "Lynn," she said, pointing to herself. Dakota nodded slowly. "May Lynn," he repeated. Then he placed his hand on his chest. "Dakota." The simple exchange was the beginning of something important, two strangers trying to understand one another. Over the next few days, May Lynn slowly regained strength. She spoke very little English, and Dakota spoke even less, but they found ways to communicate. Sometimes they used gestures, sometimes simple words. At first, May Lynn watched Dakota carefully, still unsure if she could trust him. Back in the wagon train, she had heard frightening stories about Apache warriors from the merchants traveling with her. But the man before her did not match those stories. Dakota never raised his voice. He brought her food before eating himself. When she struggled to stand, he supported her gently without speaking. Slowly, the fear in her eyes began to fade. One evening, while sitting near the fire outside the shelter, May Lynn looked toward the endless desert stretching beyond the valley. The memory of the wagon attack still haunted her. Dakota noticed the sadness in her expression. "What happened?" he asked carefully. Mei Lin hesitated. "The wagon. Bad men," she said slowly. "They come. Shooting." Dakota nodded. That much he had already guessed. But something about her story felt incomplete. She claimed she was traveling with merchants heading west. Yet her clothing and the small silk pouch she carried suggested a life far more important than that of a simple traveler. Still, Dakota asked no further questions. Among his people, trust was earned with time, not forced with words. As the days passed, the quiet bond between them grew stronger. Two lonely lives, one shaped by loss, the other by secrets, had been brought together by chance in the harsh desert. But far beyond the mountains, unseen eyes were already searching for the missing survivor of the Wagon Massacre. And soon, the peace of Dakota's hidden valley would be tested by dangers neither of them expected. Life in the hidden valley slowly returned to a quiet rhythm. Each morning the sun rose above the tall red cliffs, filling the small valley with warm golden light. The sound of the nearby stream and the rustling desert wind created a peaceful place far away from the violence of the frontier. For Dakota, the valley had always been a place of solitude. But now it felt different. Mei Lin had begun helping with simple daily tasks as her strength returned. Though her injured arm was still healing, she insisted on doing what she could. She gathered dry wood near the stream, prepared food beside the fire, and sometimes watched Dakota as he repaired tools or carved wood with his knife. Their conversations were still simple, but they were learning. Dakota taught her a few Apache words for things around the valley. "Water," he said one morning, pointing to the flowing stream. "Two," he explained. Mei Lin smiled softly and repeated the word. "Two." She then pointed toward the sky. "Sky," she said in English. Dakota nodded, slowly learning the word himself. These quiet exchanges became their daily lessons. Yet despite the calm in the valley, danger was quietly moving across the frontier. 2 days after the Wagon Massacre, a group of rough-looking riders arrived in the nearby town of Dry Creek. Their horses were tired from fast travel, and the men carried rifles and revolvers strapped to their belts. They were not ordinary travelers. The men entered the small saloon where frightened townspeople watched them carefully. Their leader was a tall man, with a scar across his cheek and cold eyes that studied every face in the room. "We're looking for a survivor," he announced loudly. "A Chinese girl, young, she escaped a wagon attack." The room fell silent. One nervous man behind the bar cleared his throat. "Wagon. Train came through last week," he said slowly. "Heading west." "That's the one," the scarred man replied. "Bandits hit it, but someone important was supposed to be on that wagon." He placed a small pouch of gold coins on the counter. "Anyone who helps us find her gets paid." The men in the saloon exchanged uneasy looks. No one liked trouble, especially when armed strangers were involved. Outside the town, the desert stretched wide and empty, but the scarred man smiled slightly. "She can't hide forever," he said to his companions. "The girl carries something worth more than gold." Far away in the quiet valley, Mei Lin sat beside the stream washing a small cloth in the cool water. As she worked, her fingers briefly touched something hidden beneath her clothing. She quickly looked around to make sure Dakota was not nearby. Then she pulled out a small object wrapped in silk. Inside was a beautiful jade necklace, carved in the shape of a delicate dragon. The stone glowed softly in the sunlight, its green color deep and rich. This necklace was no ordinary jewelry. It was a royal symbol. Mei Lin stared at it silently, her expression filled with worry. In truth, she was not a merchant traveler like she had told Dakota. Her real name was Li Mei Lin, daughter of a powerful Chinese noble family connected to the imperial court. Months earlier, enemies within her homeland had plotted against her family to gain power. To protect her life. Loyal friends secretly sent her across the ocean to America under a new identity. The wagon train had been part of that escape, but somehow her enemies had discovered the truth, and now they were hunting her. Mei Lin slowly wrapped the jade necklace back inside the silk pouch and hid it again beneath her clothing. She glanced toward the shelter where Dakota was sharpening his hunting spear. Apache warrior had saved her life without asking for anything in return. He had given her food, safety, and kindness when she had nothing, yet he still did not know who she truly was, and she feared that if he did, it might bring danger to the one place she had finally begun to feel safe. As the evening sun dipped behind the cliffs, Dakota returned from checking the mountain trails. Something in the air felt wrong. The wind carried faint signs of distant riders somewhere beyond the desert hills. Dakota's instincts told him the quiet days in the valley might soon come to an end. And neither he nor Mei Lin yet realized that. Powerful men were already searching the frontier following rumors, gold, and the promise of a hidden princess. The peaceful silence of the hidden valley did not last forever. One late afternoon, Dakota stood on a high ridge overlooking the desert. From that point, he could see miles of open land stretching toward the distant horizon. The Apache warrior had climbed there to check the trails, a habit he followed every few days to make sure no strangers were moving near his home. At first, everything seemed normal. Then Dakota saw them. Far away, small shapes moved across the desert floor. Riders on horseback. Their figures were distant, but the rising dust behind them made it clear they were traveling fast and with purpose. Dakota narrowed his eyes. 5 riders. They were following the main canyon trail, the same one that eventually led toward his hidden valley. Most travelers avoided that path because it was dangerous and confusing to navigate. Only someone searching carefully would come that way. Dakota's instincts told him these men were not ordinary travelers. He quickly turned and made his way down the rocky slope toward the shelter. Back in the valley, Mei Lin was sitting beside the stream, carefully washing a cooking pot. The peaceful sound of flowing water filled the air. But when she saw Dakota approaching quickly, she knew something was wrong. He rarely moved with such urgency. "Riders," Dakota said simply. Mei Lin froze. "How many?" she asked in slow English. 5. Her face turned pale. A deep fear rose in her chest, one she had been trying to hide since the day he rescued her from the destroyed wagon train. "They come here?" she asked quietly. Dakota nodded. "Maybe." Without wasting time, he began preparing. Dakota moved calmly but quickly, gathering what he needed. He checked his rifle, filled a small pouch with extra bullets, and placed his hunting knife at his belt. The valley had protected him for years, but if strangers had found this place, he would defend it. Mei Lin watched him silently. A terrible thought crossed her mind. What if the riders were the same men who attacked the wagon train? What if they had followed her trail all the way here? If that was true, then Dakota was now in danger. Because of her, the sound of distant horses soon echoed through the canyon. The riders were close. Dakota led Mei Lin toward a cluster of large rocks near the shelter. "Stay here," he said firmly. Mei Lin grabbed his arm. "No," she whispered. "Danger." Dakota met her worried eyes for a moment. He understood what she was trying to say, but his decision was already made. "This is my land," he replied quietly. He stepped forward into the open valley. Just as the riders appeared between the canyon rocks, the 5 men rode into the tube. clearing and quickly spotted him standing near the shelter. Their leader, a tall man with a long scar across his cheek, slowly dismounted his horse. His cold eyes studied Dakota carefully. "Well now," the man said with a mocking smile, "looks like we found ourselves an Apache." The other riders spread out slightly, their hands resting near their weapons. Dakota stood still, calm and watchful. "What do you want?" he asked. The scarred man laughed softly. "We're looking for someone," he said. "A Chinese girl, young, hurt. She escaped a wagon attack not far from here." Dakota said nothing. The man's eyes slowly scanned the valley. "You see," he continued, "that girl is very valuable, worth a great deal of money to the right people." He stepped a little closer. "If she's here, you hand her over. Nice and easy." Silence filled the valley. The desert wind moved softly through the rocks as Dakota's expression remained steady. "I have seen no one," he said. The scarred man's smile faded. "Careful." "Apache," he said coldly. "You don't want to lie to me." At that moment, one of the riders noticed something near the rocks behind the shelter, a faint movement where Mei Lin was hiding. "Boss?" the man called out. "Someone's back there." The scarred man's eyes lit up with cruel satisfaction. "Well now," he said slowly, "looks like our search is over." He began reaching for his gun, but Dakota moved first. In one swift motion, the Apache warrior raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the ground near the man's feet. The loud crack echoed through the canyon, stopping the riders instantly. "Leave," Dakota said firmly. The tension in the valley grew thick and dangerous. For the first time, Mei Lin realized something powerful. Dakota did not know who she really was. He did not know she was being hunted across the frontier, yet he was willing to stand against armed men to protect her. And the next few moments would decide whether the valley remained a place of peace or became a battlefield. The echo of Dakota's rifle shot still rang through the canyon walls. For a moment, no one moved. The 5 riders stared at the Apache warrior standing calmly in the center of the valley, his rifle steady in his hands. The warning shot had struck the sand only inches from their leader's boots. The scarred man's expression hardened. "You just made a very big mistake," he said slowly. But Dakota did not lower his weapon. "Leave," he repeated firmly. The riders glanced at one another. They had expected an easy capture, a frightened survivor hiding somewhere in the desert. Instead, they found a warrior who clearly knew how to fight. The scarred man stepped back slightly, brushing dust from his coat where the bullet had struck the ground. "You don't understand what you're protecting," he said coldly. "That girl isn't just some lost traveler." Dakota said nothing. Behind the rocks, Mei Lin's heart pounded in fear. She knew the truth was about to come out. The men searching for her clearly knew more than she had hoped. The scarred man suddenly laughed. "Fine," he said. "Maybe the girl herself should explain it." He raised his voice. "Come out, princess, or we start burning this place down." The word princess echoed across the valley. Dakota's eyes narrowed slightly. Slowly, Mei Lin stepped out from behind the rocks. Her face was pale but determined as she walked forward. Dakota glanced at her briefly, surprised to see her reveal herself. He had told her to stay hidden. The riders immediately recognized her. "That's her," one of them said. The scarred man smiled with satisfaction. "Well, well. There you are." Mei Lin stood beside Dakota, her voice shaking slightly but still brave. "Leave him out of this," she said. "Your fight is with me." Dakota looked at her, confused by the tension in her voice and the strange word the man had used. "Princess." The scarred man crossed his arms. "You finally ready to stop running?" he asked. Mei Lin took a deep breath. "No," she replied. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the scarred man chuckled darkly. "You're worth too much to walk away from," he said. "Your enemies back home are paying a fortune to see you returned. Or dead." Dakota slowly turned toward Mei Lin. "Princess?" he asked quietly. Mei Lin looked down for a moment, unable to meet his eyes. She knew she could no longer hide the truth. "Yes," she said softly. The riders watched with amusement as the truth unfolded. "My real name is Li Mei Lin," she continued slowly. "My family is powerful in China. Some people there want that power for themselves." She reached beneath her clothing and carefully pulled out the silk pouch she had kept hidden. Opening it, she revealed the jade necklace shaped like a dragon. The green stone shone brightly in the afternoon sunlight. "This is proof of my family," she said. The riders immediately recognized it. "That necklace alone is worth a king's ransom," one of them muttered. Mei Lin's voice trembled slightly as she continued. "My friend sent me across the ocean to hide. The wagon train was supposed to take me far away, where no one could find me." She looked toward the scarred man, but they followed. The man nodded proudly. "Smart girl." Then Mei Lin turned to Tako. Her eyes were filled with guilt. "I lied to you," she said quietly. "I said I was only a traveler." Dakota studied her face in silence. For several long seconds, the valley was completely still. Finally, he spoke. "You were wounded," he said calmly. "You needed help." Mei Lin blinked in surprise. "You are not angry?" she asked. Dakota shook his head slowly. "To me, you are still the same person I found under the wagon," he replied. The scarred man laughed loudly. "That's touching," he said mockingly. "But this little moment is over." He reached for his revolver again. "We're taking the princess now." The other riders began stepping forward, weapons ready. Dakota calmly lifted his rifle once more. "Take another step," he said quietly, "and you will not leave this valley." The wind blew softly through the canyon as the two sides faced each other. Now the truth was clear. Dakota knew exactly who Mei Lin was. He knew powerful enemies were hunting her across the frontier, and still, the lonely Apache warrior had chosen his side. He would protect her. No matter the cost. The desert sun sank behind the red cliffs, casting long shadows across the hidden valley. After the tense standoff with the scarred riders, Dakota and Mei Lin stood side by side, breathing in the quiet that had returned, at least for the moment. The riders had fled, knowing they could not match Dakota's knowledge of the land and skill with his rifle. But the threat was not gone entirely. More could come. Yet here, in this secluded place, there was a chance for a new beginning. Mei Lin slowly untied the small bundle of silk that had held her jade necklace, her fingers tracing the dragon carving that symbolized her royal lineage. In her old life, she would have been forced into a world of court politics and endless danger. Here, she could finally be free, not as a princess, but as herself. Dakota watched her, noticing the shift in her posture. Gone was the fear and hesitation that had marked the first days in his care. Instead, she stood with a quiet strength, tempered by everything she had survived. He realized that her courage was not only admirable but familiar. It reminded him of the warriors of his own Apache people. "We must be careful," Dakota said quietly. "They will not stop searching." Mei Lin nodded. "I know," she replied, "but I do not want to run anymore. Not if we can build something here." And so they began. Over the following weeks, they repaired the shelter, cleared small plots of land for crops, and built fences to keep wild animals away. Dakota taught Mei Lin how to track small game and gather edible plants from the surrounding desert. In return, Mei Lin taught him some words in her language and shared knowledge of the wider world beyond the frontier. Each day brought new lessons and deeper understanding between them. The hidden valley gradually transformed from a refuge into a small, thriving homestead. Dakota began to see the land not just as a place of survival, but as a home, a place where they could both belong. Mei Lin's presence softened the loneliness that had weighed on him for so long, her laughter echoing through the canyon like a gentle wind that carried warmth even through cold desert nights. Despite the quiet peace, the world beyond the cliffs still waited. Rumors of the hunted princess had reached frontier towns, and some men might come seeking her again. But Dakota knew that the valley's natural defenses and their combined knowledge of the land gave them a unique advantage. Whoever came would face the full force of his protection. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of gold and purple, Mei Lin sat beside the fire, her hand brushing against Dakota's. He looked down at her, seeing both the girl he had rescued and the woman she had become. Words were unnecessary. They had survived together, learned from each other, and built trust where fear once lived. "You saved my life," Mei Lin whispered softly, "and I could not have done any of this without you." Dakota's gaze met hers. "You would have survived, but I could not leave you." Their hands clasped naturally, a simple gesture that spoke of gratitude, respect, and something deeper that had grown quietly between them. As the seasons passed, Dakota and Mei Lin cultivated the land, raised small animals, and built a life that blended their two worlds. Word eventually reached the frontier towns that the lost princess was safe, but no one could find her hidden valley. The desert kept it secret, and in that safety they flourished. In time, the lonely Apache warrior was no longer lonely, and the hidden princess was no longer running. They had found each other, not as the identities the world had forced upon them, but as two people who had endured loss, danger, and uncertainty together. What had begun as a desperate rescue from a wagon massacre became a story of trust, courage, and the beginnings of love. Dakota and Mei Lin built a home in the wild, a place where the harsh desert was not only a test of survival, but also a canvas for a new life, a life shared, strong and free. In the end, the hidden princess and the solitary Apache warrior found a future neither had dared to imagine, a future forged in the heart of the wild frontier, where loyalty, bravery, and love prevailed over fear and danger. And in that valley, their story would remain untold to the world, but everlasting in the land they had come to call home.